supper and a mother at the best place around. Some stupid with a flare gun burned the place to the ground. Smoke on the water, fire in the sky. Smoke on the water. Burned down the gambling house. It died with an awful sound. Funky and Claude was running in and out, pulling kids out of the ground. But when it all was over, we had to find another place. Swiss time was running out. It seemed that we would lose the race. Smoke on the water, fire in the sky. Smoke on the water.
You wanna know what goes on backstage? Oh, come on. Let me take you by the hand. Ow!
Rudy, are you ready?
Ladies and gentlemen,
The way I see it, Barry, this should be a very dynamite show.
You know, I have no idea what the name of this program is, but you're watching it.
Backstage,
All you ever want,
backstage,
all you ever need.
backstage.
Your dreams will be fulfilled once you are there. You'll never wanna leave. You wanna sell your ass for that backstage pass. Backstage is just for the invited. Backstage. They've laid on every...
Okay, darlings, I'm doing something here which is very special to me. Please think of Freddie Mercury. I'm going to read to you as a world premiere the final version of the beginning of my book, My Friend Freddie. It's the Freddie Mercury book. It's especially for those people who believe in me and who believed in this book for a long, long time. Let's do this, okay? A foreword of sorts. I was never really a fan of Queen, and before I got to know him, certainly not of Freddie Mercury. Back in 1971, it would never have been occurred to me that I would one day be allowed to work with one of the biggest bands and one of the most charismatic superstars in rock history. My band has always been the Rolling Stones, filthy, dirty, and insolent, with that Keith Richards guitar sound that hot wires your ears to your genitals. Nevertheless, I accepted when, at the end of the 70s, the record company offered the chance to interview the Queen singer in Munich. After all, back then, Queen were, as they are today, one of the most successful bands in the world. Freddie Mercury's reputation for hating TV interviews preceded him, so I set off with my TV crew for Munich, my palms were sweating. Freddie was rumored to be a very difficult interviewee. How very different it would turn out. The interview with him, I still remember as if it was yesterday, took place in a farmhouse parlor at the Hilton Tucherpark Hotel. We clicked with each other from the very first moment. We were instantly simpatico, and it was the beginning of what would become a decades-long collaboration and friendship with Freddie and Queen. Freddie kicked off the conversation with something like, "I've had to give bloody interviews all day. You are the last person I'm talking to, and because I'm thrilled that it's all over soon, you will get the best interview, darling." And he was true to his words, delivering meaty sound bites like, "I'm just a rock and roll prostitute, my dear. And if the people stop buying our records, I become a strip artist." I dug deeper. "What music would you strip to?" Freddie's face lit up with a grin. "To all the songs I've written," he replied. "That's why I wrote them for in the first place." He burst out laughing, a laugh which I would become so familiar. Once he had calmed down, he added, as if we had known each other forever, "You believe that? You believe anything." The ice was broken. That interview was to be the starting shot of a decades-long collaboration. Not long afterwards, I, the novice Austrian filmmaker, found myself shooting my first official video with Queen for Queen Productions. Wow. I'll talk about that too in this book, which really only tells my story with Freddie. You find no exhaustive biography here, no thoughtfully researched, factually comprehensive history, but rather my story. The story of a long-haired hippie who moved out of Vienna's 9th district, Alsergrund, to conquer the world as a video director and musical filmmaker. With enough front, naivete and chutzpah to tell even Freddie Mercury after this first interview, "I sent you a copy of my TV report, and if you ever need a really good video director," Freddie nodded politely, "call me," the long-haired hippie added. Oh, Rudy. A few months later, I was in the studio with Freddie and Queen as the director of an official Queen video that would create a global furore. The chutzpah had paid off. Naivete had prevented me from considering the fact that Freddie and Queen had, up until this point, worked exclusively with top British and American directors on their videos of the likes of David Mallet, or from being in any doubt that this world-famous band had been waiting for a hippie from the Alsergrund. But somehow, the look Freddie gave me at the end of that first interview in the farmhouse parlor at the Tucherpark in Munich had signaled, "Go for the impossible. Go for the impossible, Rudy." And that's what I did. The relationship between Freddie and myself would, over the years, become a very special one. Not just because he made me his sort of personal filmmaker, we also became friends. As a friend, it's not easy to write a book about your friend. I have been dragging my heels for more than 25 years. I tell stories in this book that I've never told before. What happened behind the scenes on video shoots, how I traveled with and for Freddie halfway around the world, from London to New York, India to Rio de Janeiro, Ibiza to Montreux. Freddie on tour, Freddie in the studio, Freddie the Rascal, Freddie as patron, and the private Freddie, right up to the very last interview he ever gave on camera to me. And I still remember just as I remember that very first interview with him, the terrible, terrible call from his manager and dear friend until this day, Jim Beach, when he told me Freddie was gone. Although for me, Freddie is still here, ever present. Not just in his songs and in my countless videos and documentaries, many of which I did with my partner at the time, Hannes Rossacher, but in photographic records, interviews, recorded live shows. Freddie was, alongside Frank Zappa and Keith Richards, quite simply my best advisor, motivator, and mentor of my whole career. I still feel his presence on important projects today when he says, never try to be second best. I hear this voice warning me before I'm about to make a mistake saying, this is too clever, Rudi. And at the same time, I miss him. Oh God. I miss him so very much. I miss his humor, his intelligence, his radicalism, his art, his excess. Every fucking day. Forgive me, dear reader, if this book has in part become my attempt to come to terms with the loss of a friend. And at this point, Freddie would say, now get on with it, Rudi. I'm getting bored. Have fun reading my story about one of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever had the privilege and pleasure to meet. This is for you, Fred. Postscriptum. P.S. Dear Queen fans, I want to add a P.S., a postscriptum, simply to avoid any misunderstanding or misconception. This book is called My Friend Freddie, but that doesn't mean that I'm not friends with Brian and Roger. On the contrary. Brian calls me pal until this day, and I'm very proud of it. And the adventures of rock and roll, of R&R, of Roger and Rudi, when we were the terrible twins as party animals from Ibiza to LA and back again, would fill a separate book. But in this case, I think Roger agrees it's better that the R&R stories stay untold. Also worth to mention is a little detail often forgotten these days. On the historic day, I never said that, when I interviewed Freddie in Munich, at the very same day I also did an equally great interview with Brian in his suite in the Hilton Hotel, which I will re-release just to complete the history. So it probably was, as always, a democratic band decision to hire me for One Vision, and the Brian interview might have been equally important in the decision-making as the world-famous prostitute interview with Freddie. That needed to be said. Chapter 1. How to become a video director for Queen and Freddie Mercury. People often ask me how it came about that Dolezal works for Queen. Whatever one hopes to get as an answer, I always disappoint them. It was neither a big plan, and if it was, not by me, nor a successful coup. No ingenious sneaking up, no tireless networking, no endless ambush, no penetrating annoyance. It was a little word that had an enormous effect. Persistence. Simply keeping your eye on the ball. To the things you want to achieve and in general in life. Back then, in the early 1980s, I worked for Austrian television. Ohne Maulkorb was the name of the program for those who can still remember it. To anyone who doesn't or who can't remember, just imagine exactly as the name says, unmuzzled. We were a young editorial team and were not about to be told to keep our mouths shut. And of course, it was a lot about music. At some point, a story was due in Munich. Christel Feldhütter, the press lady for EMI Records, who at the time was not yet married, so her surname was Ruschka, said Queen was in town and available for an interview. It was a relatively insignificant TV report about the not at all insignificant band Queen, so it sounded interesting. With Ohne Maulkorb being the only program in Austria that at the time was dealing with pop music on television, I did 2 or 4 interviews with pop stars per month. A music section was always part of the broadcast, which most of the time was also designed by myself or later by my partner Hannes Rossacher. I got Queen. Management hadn't promised too much in advance. There was a photo session to be filmed, yawn. 2 interviews, one with Queen guitarist Brian May, interesting. One with Freddie Mercury, very interesting. And a press conference, yawn. I agreed. The 2 yawn points on the agenda made me a little nervous. On the one hand, boring photo sessions and dull press talks are no cinematic graduation exam, and on the other hand, boring events rarely turn into gripping scenes. So I had to make up for that with the interviews. I boarded the bus to Munich with mixed feelings and a modest film team, a cameraman and a sound guy. It was just as I had feared. The photo session was filmed near Munich's trendy P1 club at Prinzregentenstraße 1 and did not last more than 5 minutes. The press conference took place inside the club and brought no surprises. For the interview we moved to the Hilton Park, Munich, am Tucher Park, a hotel that was to become my new home for the next few years. But at the time, I didn't have the faintest idea about that. Brian May was very polite, precise, and a little bit boring. Later, when we knew each other much better, I told him I appreciated my questions being answered with such honesty and detail, purely human, but as an interviewer and director, I would prefer him to embellish the story here and there to add excitement. Freddie Mercury was a completely different story. I entered the Bauernstube, a room of rustic design of a farmer's parlor. I think it was a bar, crammed full with an entourage of assistants, press managers, makeup team, and someone I didn't know at the time who introduced himself as producer Mac. Somewhere in the middle of all this was Freddie. He was having a clear drink, which I mistook for water. Later, I knew that he liked to drink vodka. It was 5 p.m. and I was the last interview of the day, which had been very exhausting for Freddie. He was wearing a white vest and jeans, and we hit it off brilliantly from the get-go. This was exactly the interview that made up for the boring parts. The story was in the can, we packed the cameras, we said goodbye, and I promised to send a copy to London as soon as the story was finished. Let us remember, back then, it was the time of VHS cassettes. Hardly imaginable today. Anyway, all artists hear that phrase from all TV editors and directors, but nobody sticks to it. 99 out of 100 TV journalists never bothered to make a copy, put it in an envelope, write an address on it, and take it to the post office. I was that hundredth. I wanted more. Freddie and I had gotten along well. I imagined I felt a certain chemistry between the two of us. With this little TV report for One Malkorp, I realized Freddie and I are on the same wavelength. Now, stay on the ball, Dolezal. Really, the probability of being hired by Queen as an Austrian for a job as a director was at the time about the same as North Korea winning the 1985 World Football Championship. I tried anyway. I had a VHS cassette on my contribution made, sat down and inscribed the label myself on a portable typewriter with my two-finger system. And I finally wrote my name, address, and, very important, my telephone number. After all, this was also the time of landlines. Hard to believe in this day and age. I sent a parcel to London, to Queen Management, Pembridge Road, Queen Productions. So far, so good. A few weeks later, Jim Beach, Queen's manager, a fatherly friend to this day, calls me. Is this RUDI DOLEZAL? Yes, this is RUDI DOLEZAL. Jim clears his throat. You sent us a package with the video cassette of the Queen feature you filmed in Munich and the interviews with Freddie and Brian. We really liked it. Oh, I'm glad you did. Do you work exclusively for Austrian television or also independently? It took me some time to register just who was on the line. When he asked this question, I didn't at all understand what he was getting at. Before I can answer, Jim continues talking. He wants to know if I could like to come to Munich. I would be on the short list as a director to shoot the new Queen video. I almost dropped the telephone receiver. I picked up the phone in passing, but forget in a second where I'd actually wanted to go. I let myself sink into an armchair. The great world-famous band Queen calls little RUDI DOLEZAL for a video? Queen, who can hire the best and the most famous directors in the world, mostly from England or the USA, at the snap of a finger, call me in my bachelor's flat in Vienna's 16th district because they might want to work with me? Yes, I say, gladly, I come to Munich. I booked the next flight to Munich. I would have crawled there on all fours to what had happened. I talked to Jim Beach, Freddie and the band about this call many times later. As far as I know today, several things had come together. First of all, the VHS tape with the copy of my contribution for One Malkorp. We liked what we saw, said Freddie. You made a lot out of very little possibilities. The contribution was cleverly put together and above all, edited very rhythmically. And the interviews were characterized by questions away from the routine. We thought to ourselves, the boy is good. So were many other directors. Item 2 on the list of things that colluded so well, Queen was the big star of Live Aid. Live Aid, you have to know, was organized by Bob Geldof. He too became a friend of mine later. It was to be a worldwide outcry, an appeal for the first fundraising campaign against the famine in Ethiopia, with pop stars contributed to. For this, 2 huge concerts were hosted in London's Wembley Stadium and Philadelphia's John F. Kennedy Stadium. At the same time, simultaneously broadcast live with a star lineup that had never been seen on stage before, let alone on television. It did become a worldwide outcry. Artists involved were David Bowie, Elton John, Mick Jagger, Bob Dylan, Paul McCartney, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Dire Straits, Sting, Santana, Madonna, Status Quo, Tina Turner, Eric Clapton, Phil Collins, U2, Black Sabbath, The Beach Boys, Simply Minds, Sade, Duran Duran, Judas Priest, Bryan Adams, and many more. Later, there were different opinions about how musically valuable this evening was. Some critics felt that Geldof's idea of a jukebox on television was only partly a good one. The concept of one celebrity band or artist after another playing their hits had, in their view, only produced a few highlights. For example, Mick Jagger's duet with David Bowie, or the Bob Dylan's performance with Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones. But there was one thing about that day where there were not divided opinions at all. Queen was the best band at Live Aid. Freddie's performance is still regarded as one of the greatest moments in pop history, even though Queen's performance didn't even last 30 minutes. In fact, it lasted 21 minutes. By the way, he thrilled both the audience in the stadium and on the TV screens, and it was simply unique. For the starving people in Africa, it was life-saving in any case. The appeal for donations reached people all over the world, and an estimated rate was an audience of 1 billion viewers. As I learned later, immediately after this triumph, the discussion with manager Jim Beach was held to build on this success for Queen's career. You don't let attention like this go to waste in show business. You just add on to it. But there was one little stumbling block. The 4 band members had actually agreed on a Queen-free year. John Deacon had planned a world tour, Brian May a holiday with his family, Roger Taylor a boat trip with friends, and Freddie a solo album, if I remember correctly. In other words, nobody had time for Queen. Point 3, which is what granted me the phone call, was a purely geographical one. Munich is close to Vienna, and I had an advocate called Mac. Because time was short, there was only a few days in Munich where all the band members could get together. It was just enough to write a song, record it, and make a video at the same time. At the Musicland studio in Munich, and there sat Mac, that producer I'd met at the Bauernstuben bar in the Hilton, who by then had seen my Austrian television contributions about people like Frank Zappa, Tom Waits, and the Rolling Stones, and put in a good word for me with Queen. Thanks, Mac. But I didn't know all this when the telephone receiver almost fell out of my hand in Vienna because Jim Beach asked me to come to Munich. So I traveled to Munich to meet Queen's manager. I meet him at the Munich Hilton Hotel near Tucher Park. Well, said Jim Beach, that's our plan. The entire video should be filmed during the recording studio session. Please go down to the restaurant now and give me a detailed budget in 2 hours. Yes, I say, with pleasure. I go downstairs and settle at the table in the Hilton restaurant. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day. Terrible overall with an Indian shirt underneath. An attaché case would not have matched to my long hair. Not to mention that only business assholes had such cases. An old army shoulder bag was my trademark. At that time, I had never created an international budget in English alone without a production manager. It was also the time when computer programs, laptops or iPads didn't yet exist. Again, hard to believe today. I had paper and pencil and no idea. Not to mention that such a budget is something that even experienced professionals can come up with in a few minutes in a restaurant. You need a lot of information, estimates, price comparisons, etc. Seriously, we're talking about a work of 1 or 2 days. I had 2 hours, which significantly shortened because I kept thinking, hopefully I'm not too expensive. Hopefully no competitor is cheaper. I really want to shoot this Queen video. I would pay to be allowed to shoot this Queen video. With a budget on 12,000 German Deutschmarks, around 7,000 US dollars, I dare go back up to Jim's room. With the same sweaty hands I had when I first met Freddie, I put my budget on the table by the sitting area. Jim takes the sheet and studies it for minutes. It feels like hours. Shit, I think. I should have made this deduction there. I could have, and in general, my mind was churning the numbers I just drawn from my guts. Jim looks at me and said, "Okay, you've got the job." Jim later confessed to me that he had never in his life got such a cheap budget for such a big effort. But what I still find charming to this day, it wasn't an agent or manager, a great showreel or an expensive brochure that got me my first job with Queen. It was that I had felt from that very first beginning a personal connection with Freddie. And the fact that I kept my word and sent them the result of my work. That measly VHS cassette with which it all began.
You wanna know what goes on backstage? Oh, come on. Let me take you by the hand. Ow!
Rudy, are you ready?
Ladies and gentlemen,
The way I see it, Barry, this should be a very dynamite show.
You know, I have no idea what the name of this program is, but you're watching it.
Backstage. All you ever want. Backstage. All you ever need. Backstage. Your dreams will be fulfilled once you are there. You'll never wanna leave. You wanna sell your ass for that backstage pass. Backstage is just for the invited.